Hey guys, it's Courtney, and I'm back with another card using the Festive Poinsettia stamp set by Altenew. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of watercoloring with my Arteza real brush pens. So I'm starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock here, and I'm using my Misty. I use my anti-static tool. I'm going to be doing some heat embossing, so I want to make sure that I don't have any stray embossing powder stick to areas that I don't want it to stick to. I am stamping with Versamark ink, and I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle on my silver embossing powder by Hero Arts. Now, while I'm doing all of this, I'm letting my heat tool heat up and warm up before I take it to the paper. Certain paper warps more than others, but any heat was going to warp any paper basically. So I let this heat up for about 30 seconds or 45 seconds before I bring it to the paper. I'll move my heat tool around so I'm not keeping it in one specific area for too long. This will minimize the warping. Once that is embossed, I brought back out my Misty and I took a piece of Eclipse masking paper, and I didn't even bother to move my stamp. I'm just going to stamp the one side of the image with a light ink. I'm just using the fade out ink by Ink on 3, but you can really use anything. I only need to mask out this small part of the stamp. So I did go ahead and fussy cut that out and line that up with my embossed image. Now, you may have a problem having this stick because of the embossing, but I'm not doing any kind of ink blending or anything. So this is just basically so I don't stamp one image right over another. I lined up my stamp again, and I will use my anti-static tool again and stamp this with my Versamark ink and heat set this with that same silver embossing powder by Hero Arts. This is where I noticed that I didn't turn my stamp enough, so it basically looks like I stamped the image the same exact way twice, which I pretty much did, but I wasn't going to start over, so it is what it is. We are going to keep it the way it is. So once that is heat set, I moved on to my coloring. And now my markers or my pens do not have labels as far as what colors they are. So I'm starting off with this red, and this is a true red. And I have my water over there with a paintbrush and a paper towel, and I'm just scribbling out some color right there on the base of the petal. Actually, this is a leaf. One of you guys let me know that a poinsettia is actually all leaves. They're just different colors. So that's pretty interesting. But anyway, I'm taking a damp paintbrush and just kind of dragging out some of that color all the way to the edge of the leaf. I'll let that dry for a minute before I add any additional color, and I'll move on to the next leaf over here, just doing the same thing, scribbling out some of that color and dragging that out with a damp paintbrush. Now you don't want to add too much water or else you're going to get like puddling and it won't dry. You'll have really harsh lines. So this is basically just a damp paintbrush. You can always go back and add more water if needed. Now I'll go back to this first one that we colored here, and I started off with this deeper red, but it wasn't giving me any kind of contrast. So I brought in this brown and just added a little bit of a shadow right there in the center where this leaf would kind of be folded over on itself a little bit, and then just blended that out with a damp paintbrush again. I'll go back into this larger leaf down here and do the same thing just to add a little bit more contrast. I also added a little bit of a shadow where that one leaf from the first stamp is kind of laying over this one. I just added a little bit of a shadow, just darkening up that area a little bit. I'll continue to kind of move around my panel here and basically do the same thing, but what I did from this point on is that I added the brown right over top of the red before I brought in the water. So here you'll see I'll add my red, add that brown, and then go back in with my damp paintbrush and blend all of that out. Now you'll have trouble adding more color while the area is still wet. So if you want to add more color, you're not getting the vibrancy that you're looking for, let the petal dry or let the leaf dry and go back in and add more, and then you can always blend that out with more water. I colored all of my red leaves the same exact way, and then we'll move on to the green leaves, which I pretty much did the same way, just obviously different color combinations. So I am starting off with this lighter green here. It's not too dark, but I did try to clean up some of these areas where I actually put my hand in it when it was still wet and kind of dragged some color around. I just put some damp water, tried to blot that up with a paper towel. Didn't really work, so we'll have to go in with a white gel pen later. So for these leaves, we're going to do the same thing as we did with the others. I'm laying out my lightest green, going in with a little bit of a darker green right there in the center, taking my damp paintbrush and blending all of that out. Now for these, I didn't add the brown or any additional color. I kept these pretty bright and vibrant. I wish I would have used a little bit darker of a color, but it is what it is. So for all of these leaves, again, I did the same thing as the red leaves. Now there's this one leaf there on the top that's kind of, it looks like a half a leaf. It must be like folded in half. So for that one, I just placed my color down on the very base of the leaf, like where the veins would be right there in the center, and then took my clean water, my damp paintbrush, and blended that out as well. For the stems, I wasn't really worried about getting too much shading. The stems are very teeny tiny on the top of this stamp, and because we embossed the image and embossed the lines are even tinier. So I wasn't really worried about getting too much shading. I went in with my darkest green and did add a little bit of shading to the stem that's kind of on the bottom where it's a little bit thicker, just underneath where that one leaf is hanging over it. And for the top, I just went in with my straight color. I'm not going to take my paintbrush to that part at all. I did not add my lightest green here. I'm just going to use the damp paintbrush to blend out that thicker part of the stem there on the bottom, just leaving a very small highlight there in the center. For the center of the flowers, I guess this would be like where stamen would be, but I don't think they're stamen. I just used like a golden yellow color and went in straight with the color. Again, not adding any water. These are teeny tiny areas. I don't feel the need to do any blending here. Once all of my coloring was done, I took my panel here and I trimmed this down. Now this is 5.5 inches long, and I'm trimming this down to 2 3/4 wide. Now I wanted some kind of a border on this. So I took another piece of Nina Solar White, which is different than the other cardstock we used. And this is cut down to 5.5 by 3. So just 1/4 inch longer than our other panel. And I'm taking my Versamark pad here and I'm just squishing that ink down on either edge of that card panel, sprinkling the embossing powder on either edge. Only a little tiny bit of this is going to show, so I'm not worried about, getting good coverage there in the center. Taking my heat tool and heat setting all of that. Now, the first time you emboss a large area and not just a lined image, it kind of looks a little bit bumpy. So you can leave it like this. You're probably, for the amount that's going to be showing, you probably wouldn't have noticed it anyway. But I did go back in and add another layer of that VersaFine or Versamark ink right over top of my embossed area, added more embossing powder and heat set that, and you'll see that the second time around you'll get a much more smooth effect. And like I said, for the amount that's going to be showing, I wouldn't worry about this if I had to do it again. But if you did want a larger border or maybe a larger area that you're going to be working with, definitely embossing it twice gives it a more smooth appearance. Now I did let this cool down for a minute or two just because the 2 layers of embossing powder really makes this stay hot and sticky for longer than normal. So before I popped this up with my Fun Foam, I took my white gel pen just to clean up some of those areas that my color kind of dragged out from when I put my hand in it, and also some of the areas where I was just a little sloppy and went out of the lines. The damp paintbrush and paper towel was not working, so I figured rather than spread out that color even more, it's just best to take my white gel pen to fix that up. Next, I took the piece of Fun Foam. I use the kind that has adhesive on one side, stuck that down to my colored panel, and I'm using strong double-sided adhesive in order to stick this panel down right onto my embossed panel, just leaving a very tiny little edge around the top and the bottom. Now, once that was stuck down to my embossed panel there, I took an A2 size card base just to make sure that I had my placement right, so that I still had room for my sentiment. I decided to stamp and emboss my sentiment right on top of my card base itself, which is not something I typically do. I usually at least add one layer to each of my cards, but I'm taking this large Joy stamp that is part of the stamp set, and I'm using my anti-static tool again, my Versamark ink, and my silver embossing powder, and just embossing this right in the center on the top that will be above this little strip of our poinsettias. Once I had that heat set, and this is where you're definitely going to want to make sure that you have your heat tool set up, or heated up rather, because you don't want your card base to be warped. I use my Tombow Mono multi glue to adhere this to my card base right there in the center, and that is it for this card. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.